This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Therefore, putting aside all filthiness, and all that remains of wickedness, and humility, receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. But prove yourselves doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. The one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does. If anyone thinks himself to be religious, and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Let's pray. Gracious God, I thank you for this time that I have today to preach, Lord. I pray that your Spirit would come upon your people, God, that their hearts and their minds would be open to receive what you have to give them this morning, Lord. I pray that they would be fed, God, with your word, Lord. I pray that I would be faithful to this, Lord, not simply spouting off my own ideas, my own thoughts, Lord, but accurately communicating what you wish to give to your people. Lord, may we take this word, may it be applied to our lives, may it be applied to our various situations, God, and Lord, may we be a people who not only hear your word, God, but are those who also do your word. Father, I thank you for this opportunity, Lord, and again, I pray that this may be a way to bring glory to your name. I pray these things in Jesus Christ's name. So again, here we see James. He's in this section here. He tells you what he's going to tell you, and then he tells you, and then he tells you what he told you. These are the basic ways that you communicate with people within a letter type of format. And so we see that this is here for James. And there's three aspects here that we can talk about here that James is wishing to communicate. Again, each one of these sections I could preach an entire sermon on. And so I'm thankful here that this is still the introduction, because James is going to be going into more detail later on from each one of these sections. But the 3 points that James is wanting to get across here is, number one, that each Christian, each believer needs to have control over their tongue. That's point number one, is having a control over your tongue. Number two is that each person must be a doer of the word, or must be seeking to help other people, must be seeking to look after people in their times of need, and they must seek to keep themselves unstained, or to remove all filthiness from the world, so there's a sense of holiness there. And then finally, be doers of what you hear. Do not simply hear and go away and do not do anything, but act upon what you have heard. One of the first things that we see here in verse 19 is something that if only everybody did this. When he says, everybody must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Could we not find a more relevant message for our world today in which we live in, right? So often do we see people who are much quicker to speak and very slow to hear, and they are very quick to anger. Did you know that around 60% of people will share a news article just by reading the headline? They won't read the entire article. They will read the headline and go ahead and click share. Share it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media, Gab, whatever social media websites you have. They will share that article even before they have actually read it. They share it based off of the headline. Around 30% of people will read a headline and go ahead and comment on it, or go ahead and decide if they don't like it or like it, and they haven't even read the article yet. Vast amount of people will do that. They have a bit of what you would call almost a knee-jerk reaction to it. So many people now are so quick to what? To give their opinion on things, right? They are so quick to speak on issues. Sometimes they speak on issues that they may not have any understanding on, but they go ahead and they express themselves. And with the power of the internet, with the power of social media, we have created a system to where everybody can very easily express themselves. And so that's what they are doing. We see the exact opposite, that people nowadays, they are very quick to speak, but they sometimes can be very slow to hear, very slow to listen. And oftentimes we find that as well, that they are very quick to anger. Some of you might have heard this made the news recently. about a protest/riot that went on at the University of Berkeley. What they were protesting is there was an individual who was going there to speak. He was going to express his ideas. And some of the people did not like this. They did not like the fact that there was going to be a person up there sharing these ideas. And so they decided to protest, and eventually this protest in many ways broke down into an all-out riot to where people were being assaulted, property was being damaged, and things were being set on fire. These are not individuals who were quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. It was the exact opposite. There are many individuals who will jump and they will begin to judge an individual before they've even had a chance to hear what this person has had to say. They hear about the reputation and say, I don't even want to hear what he has to say. I ask you now, this is a time of reflection. How true is this in your life? Are you somebody who is quick to hear, or are you somebody who is quick to speak? Are you someone who is slow to anger, or are you someone who is very quick to anger? Are you like a minefield? Perhaps you might know somebody who is like this, to where, again, you have to be very careful with what you talk about around them. You have to be very careful with how you talk, because you just stepped on that right button and they explode. They're just so quick. They have a very short fuse. For me personally, I know that I am one of these individuals that I am very quick to speak my mind on a particular issue. This is something where I have to learn. I have to learn to be slower to speak. This is an area of growth in my life. Oftentimes I do like to hear, I do like to listen, but I have noticed within myself that when I am listening to somebody, I have a tendency to be thinking about my response rather than thinking about what the person is actually saying. Perhaps you have found this to be true in your life, as when you listen to individuals, you're thinking about what you're going to say next. You're not actually taking in and listening to what that person is actually saying. And so this is what James is saying here. First off, he's saying that you must be quick to hear and slow to speak. What James is promoting here is a sense of self-control over the tongue. James is going to go into much more detail about that in later chapters of this letter here, but as believers, we must have a self-control over our tongue. Do you have that this morning? I would ask yourself, is your tongue, is your mouth, is your speech controlled, or is it unfeathered? Is it unhinged? You just say whatever you want. Perhaps you know people like that, or perhaps you are like that, to where there's no filter between your brain and your mouth. And whatever in your brain, it just comes spewing right out of your mouth. I've known people like that, and whereas that many times they can be very entertaining and they can be very funny, oftentimes, though, they can also say things that end up hurting a lot of different people. They can end up causing more trouble sometimes than they are entertainment, because, again, they're not putting a filter on it. And many times their mouth can get them into trouble. They can say things that they really don't mean. But as the believers here, we are encouraged to be self-controlled in what we say. We are to have that and to exercise that control over our mouth. And that is the main point that James is getting across here with this when he says, be slow to speak. It requires control. Right? When you first hear something, the natural response is you want to respond to that. And James is saying, be slow to want to do that. Continue to listen. Continue to hear. I'll give you an example about this. A Christian preacher that I like to listen to had recently gotten into some controversy. Many people were commenting, calling him an apostate. Why? Because he had had a dialogue with a Muslim imam. Now, this is someone who is very well known for debating Muslims. He is a strong believer in the faith. He believes what he believes. He knows what he believes. And he has debated, I believe, over 50 Muslims. And he has preached the gospel in each one of those debates. He has proclaimed that Jesus Christ is Lord. But yet, since he wants to have a dialogue, and essentially what this dialogue was, is he would ask questions. The imam got a chance to answer some of these questions. What do Muslims believe about this? What does the Quran say about this? It wasn't so much a debate, it was more of a dialogue. And of course, then the imam got to ask him questions, and he would get to proclaim what Christians believed about the Trinity and what Christians believed about Jesus. And it was just a conversation. But because they were having this conversation, and because he said, because he was saying here, today what we want to emphasize is we want to just talk about what we believe. We want to talk about maybe some of the things that we have in common. And there were people who at that point jumped on the bandwagon and said, no, this guy's an apostate. We've got to have nothing to do with him. Completely ignored the years of faithful service that he had had. Completely ignored how many times he had debated, and completely ignored the rest of what he said, which is, we have our differences. These differences are important. These differences matter. But tonight, we want to talk more about just what we believe. We're not emphasizing those differences as much. And so we saw that many Christians in this situation, they were very quick to speak. It's a Muslim, we can't have anything to do with them. Rather than saying, what if we just talked? I encourage you to consider that in and of yourself. Are you one that is quick to speak, or are you one that is quick to hear? James continues on, he says, therefore, putting aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness and humility, receive the implanted word that is able to save you. Notice that therefore, though, in verse 21, what does that therefore mean? It's connecting it back. There's a sense in which when you have an uncontrolled tongue, there's a filthiness about that. Many times there's a way that you can get yourself into trouble. But he also says, putting that aside and putting aside all other wickedness. What does that mean? It means that the Christian is striving to be living a life of holiness. The Christian is striving to be doing things that are good, is striving to put away the sin within us. None of us in here, we all recognize the things about our life that are wrong. We recognize the sins that we commit. And we should be striving to put those things to death. We should be striving to rid ourselves of these things. Again, we don't do this in our own power, right? And James will get into that later on. But that is the goal. We should be striving to be better, striving to remove it. Instead, how many of us today, though, just think of it as this is just the way that I am? For the individual who has no filter between their brain and their mouth, how many times do we just excuse it by saying, that's just the way that I am, that's just the way that it is. I'm just that way. But if this is what we are supposed to do, then we should not be okay with just saying, that's just the way that I am. We should be striving to be better. Each one of us have our flaws. Each one of us have our particular temptations. Each one of us have our particular sin that we continually fall into again and again and again. We should not make peace with that, though. We should be striving to put it aside. James continues on. He says, and we're going to skip these sections here between 22 and 25. We'll come back to them. But I want to skip them for now to continue on. He says, if anyone thinks himself to be religious, and yet does not bridle his tongue, and deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. James will go more into, and will go into greater detail later on. And again, he's very much giving you an introduction here. But I want to unpack that in a sense here, where again, we're talking about the tongue. He says, if anyone considers himself to be religious, if anyone considers himself to be a Christian, but does not have any control over his tongue, he's deceiving himself. Having a control, being able to know what you're saying, and being able to control what you're saying is linked to one's own faith. And he says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit the orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. When he says visit the widows and the orphans, in James' day, the widows and the orphans, they were the groups of people who were of the most afflicted. The orphans, in this sense, this is the way that the Roman citizens many times would get rid of their children if they didn't want them. What they would do is they would take the baby that they didn't want, and they would leave it out on the street and allow the child to die of the elements. I know that this is rather dark, and I'm sorry for those of you who might be offended by this. However, I wish to communicate to you what would happen in those days. This is how the Romans would get rid of the children that they didn't want. They would just simply leave the children out and allow the child to die of the elements. So many times these children would become orphans in that way because their parents had abandoned them. And there was no one to stand up for them. There wasn't any government policy for that. There wasn't anyone there. And so what the Christian people became known for doing, though, would be for collecting these children, for adopting these children, for rescuing these children from the elements and raising them as their own. Requires a certain amount of sacrifice, requires a certain amount of love for those children. As some people have said in regards to the call for those who would be pro-life, the call of the Christian should not be, don't kill them. The call of the Christian should be, we want them. For the church here today, how often do we find ourselves having a desire to care for those in need? The widows were also ones who would also be in times of distress. Widows, of course, are the ones who, their husbands had died. And many times they could sometimes lose their property. They could sometimes lose status. They could lose position. And so the widows would oftentimes be individuals in distress as well. But the primary point here is that we are to aid those who are in need. We are to aid those who are of the most afflicted. There should be a pull within your heart if you are a believer. There should be a pull within your heart to want to help those who are in need, to help those who cannot, in a way, help themselves right now. If that desire is not within you, if you do not have any love for your neighbor, for the neighbor who is in need, then you are deceiving yourself. I say this not to upset you. I say this as a warning. If you care nothing about others, and you only look after your own interests, you are deceiving yourself. Your religion is worthless. This is what James is saying here. Now, how we help others, who we help, James is going to talk about that a little bit more. And I believe that there is a way, and I'll get much into greater detail as James discusses this, because there are ways that we can talk about who we help and how we help as well. And there can be some room for debate and discussion there. But what is not up for debate, what is not up for discussion, is the desire to help. It must be our desire to be seeking to help people. If we are going to be Christians, if we are going to say that we love our neighbor, and our vision statement for the church here is to share and show the love of God in our church, our community, our country, and in the world, we cannot say that. If we simply say that and we do not live that, then it's just meaningless words. It's a nice rhetoric. It sounds good, but it's worthless. And one of the quickest ways, even though Christianity is not necessarily about this, but one of the quickest ways to lose credibility with people is to say one thing and to have your actions not reflect what you're saying. Consistently. Not everyone can do that all the time. We're all hypocrites if you look over our life, but I'm talking about a consistent saying of that. Going back to the riots at Berkeley University, some of the people there, they were very confused. There was this one lady who was giving an interview. She had been pepper sprayed or maced or something like that, and she was talking to someone later. She said it was really confusing because the people there, they had a shield, and they were pushing people away with the shield. They were assaulting people with the shield, but the shield had a heart painted on it. They would see signs saying things like, stop the hate, love all this stuff, while they're breaking things. This was a group at this particular university. I'm not saying this by and large, but at this particular protest, here was a group of people who were saying one thing, but their actions were very different. They were not promoting love. They were not promoting any type of the things that they were expressing. But they were allowing themselves to react in an uncontrolled manner, to the point to where finally they had to be dispersed with tear gas and rubber bullets. When we look at those individuals, though, that is also a time for us to look at ourselves. And we say, here's an example of someone who is a hypocrite. But am I myself also a hypocrite? Do I say things like, I care about those who are in need, I care about those of humble circumstance, I care about those who cannot provide, but then I don't back that up with any kind of action? I don't back that up by giving to them. I don't back that up by looking after them, by talking to them, by understanding that they are people, that they are made in the image of God. James here is calling for the Christian to not just say things, but to also do things. Don't just say you care for those who are in need, but actually care for those who are in need. I can sit here and I can talk about this all day long, but if my actions don't reflect it, and ultimately to me, what am I saying? It's just words. This is where we finish up here, if you will. Turn back with me to verse 22, where he says, but prove yourselves doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. There's two implications that I want you to get from this today. There's a practical implication and there's a theological implication. The practical implication is this, is that be doers. When you hear in the Scriptures to care for the poor, when you hear in the Scriptures to put away all filthiness, Do it. Don't simply just hear it and then walk away and not do it. Coming here to church, listening to a sermon day in and day out, if it has no change on your life, it's not doing you any favors. You're wasting an hour of your life. When you come here and you read in the Scriptures that you are not to lie, that you are to love your wife, or you are to love your husband, or you are to love your children, or you are to love your neighbor, or you are to value honesty, integrity, when you are to care for those who are in need, when you are to control your mouth. If you do not change anything about your life, if you simply hear these things, see the faults in yourself, and then walk out of this building and ignore everything that was said, and you are just like the individual who looks at themselves in the mirror, sees their flaws, sees the things that need to be corrected, and then walks away and corrects it. What good did that do them? And what good does a church do if the individuals here ignore what is written in the Scriptures? As I said in the children's sermon, the Bible acts as a reflection to us. It shows us our inward heart. It shows us the areas of our life where we fall short. Some of us fall short in that we do not love others the way that we are supposed to. Some of us fall short in that we do not love righteousness. Some of us fall short in that we lack self-control in areas. Some of us fall short in any other area. And so we are to see these things and we are to be striving to put them away, to address them. The Scriptures tell us the state of the world. They tell us the state of others around us and how we are to help those people. How we are to help and interact with the world around us. But if we simply hear that and we ignore it, then it's worthless. And that's the practical implication. Here's the theological implication of this. There's two parts here. Because what you're supposed to figure out is when you see yourself in the Word, when you hear the Word, when you read the Word, that Word being Scripture. As I said before, it shows you your inward self. It shows you who you really are. And if we are all acknowledging that, if we all acknowledge who we really are on the inside, then we'll recognize that we're not as good as we like to think we are. Each one of us in here have desires that aren't good. That have thoughts that we hope nobody ever finds out about. The things that we try to keep hidden down, our darkest secrets, the evil thoughts that we have. All of us in here have a need for a Savior. We have a need to be changed. And so when you come to church and you hear about your need for Christ, but you do not do anything about it, you do not change. You do not seek to become closer to Christ. You do not cling to Christ. And you're like someone who sees what's wrong with you. You're like someone who hears that they have some type of disease and then walks out of the doctor's office and says, "Oh, I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me." Jesus talked about this with the Pharisees. Jesus said, if you would say that you were blind, then you would be forgiven. But since you say you see, you will not be forgiven. What Jesus was saying there is that if the Pharisees had acknowledged their sinfulness, if the Pharisees had acknowledged that they were blind, that they had missed the point, that they were not seeing Jesus, then Jesus would forgive them. Jesus would repent because then they would be putting their trust in Christ. But since the Pharisees continue to say, "No, I see clearly, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm good," and they're not going to be forgiven. Because why do they feel that they even need forgiveness in the first place? Our lives as believers should not be a life of, "I'm fine, I'm good." It should be a life of, "I'm forgiven, I am redeemed." Our righteousness should not be our own righteousness. We should not be looking to that. We should be looking to the righteousness of Jesus. You see in the Word your flaws. Where do you turn? Do you try to change yourself in your own power? Do you try to change yourself by your own strength? Or will you cling to Jesus, the one who has conquered death, the one who stood in your place facing God's judgment for you, the one who is Alpha and Omega, the Son of God? My righteousness rests on that of Jesus Christ, not on my own righteousness, because I know preach in my own strength, but in the strength of Jesus Christ. Will you be a hearer only, or will you be a doer today? Will you trust in yourself to fix you, or will you put